All right, and Luke, I think we are live, so people should be hearing us as they join. I know we're right on the 10 o'clock mark, so we're going to give a few minutes for people to filter in. So if you're just joining and hearing, settle in, grab a glass of water, a cup of coffee. Maybe if it's a nice day outside, head out to your porch to sit outside and listen in. And again, we'll give it a few minutes before we start. We were going to say if people wanted to introduce themselves, feel free to do that in the chat, or as a fun, icebreaker. We're going to be talking a lot today about what's working with our enablement and sales content management platform and what's not. So if you want to drop your favorite or your least favorite thing in the chat about your current, enablement or CMS, you don't need to name them. We don't need to name and shame, but you can at least tell us, hey, what features are you really interested in learning more about, or where you're struggling? Feel free to do that. Or do something less serious. Let us know where you're calling in from. Let us know if you have a feline or canine companion joining you on the call. Just feel free to drop something in there and chat. And again, we'll give it just a couple minutes to let people join and get started. If you're like me at all, you're usually running about an average of 3.5 minutes late from Zoom call to Zoom call. So that's the average I tend to bookmark on, Luke. I don't know about you.
Yeah, you're better than I am. I'm 5 and pray for grace. So
yeah. Ooh, Larkin showing the gift chops here. Nice. Oh, we got people from all over. This is awesome.
Wonderful.
Hey, Hannah, almost lunchtime. We can have a debate about your favorite barbecue spot another time. I know that's a heavily debated item. We don't want to kick it off here. That might distract us for 30 minutes or so. But
I got friends in the audience. Renee, good to see you. This is great.
Are these friendly friends, Luke, or are these bust your chop friends? Like, are we gonna get some tough questions from these friends, or are they good friends?
I think we could safely count on bust your chops, but definitely friendly friends too.
Ooh, Grayson, yeah, I was just down in Austin and had some terrible acts for sure. That is good stuff.
Ooh.
All right, so we're about at the 3-minute mark here. I think we'll jump in. We'll have some more people joining as they come, but we'll start off. And I think this is being recorded, so if you do, need to drop at any point but want to catch the rest of it, feel free to grab that recording as we send out later. But pretty excited to be here with everyone. And I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Seth McGuire, so I'm the COO here at Spekit. Been in technology for the last, I'd say 15 to 20 years. I'm going to stop counting at some point as it's starting to get up there. But really excited to have joined Spekit about a year ago. I love the problem we're solving. I've been a CRO, I've been a GM, I've run revenue teams really most of my life at this point, and the problem we solve is a real one and an exciting one to me. So happy to be here. And then Luke, would love for you to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, hey everybody, Luke Martin. Super excited to be here as well. I'm the self-proclaimed steward of the stack for the last couple of years across 3 different public companies. My charter has been optimizing and building really kick-ass enablement tech stacks. Prior to that, I was a customer success manager. Shout out to all the CSMs in the crowd. And that was on the vendor side, also in the enablement tech space. So what's cool is I've seen everybody from Goldman Sachs to Disney to Molson Coors and how they are going to market and the tech stacks that they are using to go and achieve those goals and what works and what doesn't work. And so saw that from the vendor side. And then I got to go build my own now for the last couple of years, like I've said. So it's just been really fun. So Seth, stoked to be here with you to get into this topic.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you. I've gotten to hear you speak in some other place and time and learned a lot from you. So we're excited to have that expertise here. Just to kind of kick us off here, we want to start a little bit by talking about the study today. So this is the goal of today's call is really to review a research report that was put out by the Sales Enablement Collective about the ROI and the impact of sales enablement and content management platforms. So that's our goal today. It's really going to be a mix of sharing that data. So that's really going to be my job, is to be the boring one, sharing some of the data from that study, and then pulling in Luke's real world experience and the things he's built and seen to help us think about those. But we did want to start off by talking a bit about the study itself to give people some view for how that was conducted and what came from that. So this was, again, run by the Sales Enablement Collective. Spekit was a sponsor, and I'll talk in a few minutes a bit about what that means. But the Sales Enablement Collective was the owner of that research. And so they did a survey of 112 sales enablement professionals across a broad range of industries and job titles. As part of that, as the sponsor, the report did not include any data from users of Spekit's enablement platform. I think that's really important to point out, is that, the goal here was really to get to an unbiased view of what's happening out there that we all can learn from. And so the Sales Enablement Collective, did that research, analyzed that data, came out with this report. They interviewed a number of expert contributors as well. Luke here was one of those, along with some other who's who in the enablement community. I think you'll see the names on there. And so a lot of great expertise went into preparing this report. And we're really excited for you to get a sense for some of the learnings from it. In regards to Spekit as a sponsor, however, the reason we did this sponsorship was really to pressure test a lot of our own opinions. So for those who do know Spekit, we are an AI-powered just-in-time enablement experience. And so we believe that sales content management, collateral, training, knowledge, process, any information you're giving to your revenue team is really best served in the flow of work. And so the products that we're building are ones that we believe insert, using AI and other processes, insert that information right at the rep's fingertips. That's a pretty strong point of view we have. And so one of the things we wanted to get out of this research was really to pressure test that. When we say we feel these features are valuable, does the enablement community actually reflect that? Do they think that? When we talk about the things we're going to be building, do those line up with what the enablement community finds valuable? So for us, this was really a chance for us to pressure test how we're approaching the product cycle and really approaching the things we ourselves are going to build. So it was a great learning for us, but I did want to give that context. We're not going to talk that much more about Spekit throughout of this, but for those who aren't familiar, really the 30-second view of that is, again, we're a comprehensive, cohesive, centralized knowledge management center where you can store any of that information or collateral, but then we distribute it to any of the tools that your team are working in, right? So we're pushing that information using AI to deliver contextual recommendations on content in your flow of work, in Salesforce, in Gong, in email, in any of these other tools. So again, for us, this research was a great chance for us to really get a view from all of you, from the experts in the field, as to what we're building. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the research itself. There's three main sections here Luke and I are going to talk about. I'm going to go piece by piece. We're going to present the findings from each and then really open it up with Luke for some conversation and some learnings. Like, if this is the case, well, what can we do about that, right? The goal here isn't just to present some of the challenges surfaced by the research, but to leave you with some real world examples of ways you can address those, as well as to learn from the chat other things people are doing. So please don't be shy about sharing some of those things. Luke and I will do our best to read that as we chat, but we definitely, I think, for everyone else on the call, we want to learn from all of you. We want to learn from the community. Yeah. So part number one we're going to dive into is around the findings from the research report that it's easy to lose faith in your enablement platform. Really kind of what we saw from some of the research we're going to walk through is it was pretty easy for people quickly to get to a place of frustration with their platforms. And so the research starts by asking the question, why? What's frustrating there? So part one, that lack of faith. The first big piece of content here was around why companies switch platforms, right? And so really just asking the question, why did you switch? And we found something like a solid number of companies, I think it was 28%, had switched platforms in even the last 18 months, and a much larger number across a wider span of time. So if we look at the reasons why they switch platforms, you can see one, the findings on the right-hand side there, primarily, content was queen here. So the harder it was to maintain content, the less it got used. And you saw that difficult content management or content decay was the real number one reason companies switch platforms. Then we saw there started to be an adoption and UX component. And there's a couple different of the numbers here that speak to that. The low platform adoption by reps at number 2, and then that UX in the old platform. And both these speak a little bit to the same frustration levels of users, where the reason for switching is really, hey, users aren't adopting it. They're not enjoying using it. They're not using all the pieces. A little bit later, we're going to get into what features aren't being used. But at a high level, like these things weren't being used. Luke, one surprising finding I think we saw was that only 16% of respondents said that it was about pricing, right? So a pretty low amount. Now, as the guy who has to sign off on discounts when Spekit does deals, I'll tell you that's not always true in the negotiation process. But as the inception point for switching, it certainly didn't seem to be the case that pricing was the driver. And most enablers, in fact, that were surveyed were paying $50 US per user per month for the platform or above. So it's not insignificant, but that wasn't the driving force.
Interesting. Yeah.
Now, if we dive a little bit deeper into, okay, we said difficult content management, what does that mean? I think this is going to be a recurring theme we talk a bit about here, but underneath that stat was the fact that content isn't getting used. Now, these percentages can be a little bit challenging because we're merging two percentage bases here. We're talking about the percentage of respondents who responded about the percentage of content. So we'll do our best to make sure we're elucidating that. But so on the left-hand side, you see the question, what percentage of the content you've created do you think reps use? And 6 out of 10 respondents, again, out of those 100 plus respondents, thought that less than 50% of their content was getting used across the board. So that's just used for any purpose. Internal training, kind of answering questions, sales collateral, et cetera. Across all their content, more than half respondents are like, half my content's not getting used. If we look at external content, so the right-hand side now, what percentage of customer-facing content do you think reps are sharing with customers today? Well, that's where we saw 9 out of 10 respondents say 40% of their content never gets shared with buyers, which is pretty staggering to me. That's pretty costly. And we're going to get a little bit later into the time spent on creating content, but I'll pause there, Luke, because I think that the left-hand side was certainly surprising to me. The right-hand side was almost shocking to me.
So content is built for different purposes. So you got to be careful when you're looking at statistics like this, because look, if it's training content and it's not being used, obviously we should go back and take a look at that. But sometimes there's inherent value in it just being there. Coverage is the goal. It may not be views and usage, right? Like sometimes you have stuff that's there for new hire training, and you just need to make sure that it's always there for everybody you hire and bring in. And so the view count may not be the right measure to look at when you're qualifying if there's value there, right? Reference material is another one, right? Like all of your knowledge, your job aids and your knowledge base and all of that stuff, right? The value is that it's there. So it's important to slice and dice what was the intention of the content. Absolutely, if you've got a messy closet full of stuff, you're never going to find what you're looking for. And we can talk about that later. Like there are different ways of where you can go and you can reduce the signal to noise, but like this doesn't shock me, Seth, I think, but it's important to, before you go and start over rotating on this data alone, you should dig into it. The last thing I'll say here is you talk about your external content. A lot of times you got to make sure you have the right stuff. Like in my experience, most of the content, the enablement content that we put in either comes down from product and it's all product centric, or it comes down from sales leadership and says, oh, we need to teach everybody to whatever. If I'm going to go get in front of a customer, I'm probably going to customize my deck, which means I'm probably going to take the boilerplate and I'm going to go off somewhere else and make sure it tells the story I need to tell for that audience, if I'm a seller, if it's going to resonate with that audience. And so what I've seen is a lot of times we'll have that boilerplate deck and somebody will save it off locally and they'll riff on it for the customer they have, but the story's not in the data because they took it out of the system reporting from. So there are ways to do that too, right? But I think talking to your sellers and making sure that the way you're building stuff works for you, right? Yeah. There's a lot more to talk about here, but I think good numbers to be aware of. And if anything else, start there and work your way back to qualify what you have and if it's the right stuff, and then make sure you're measuring the right things for the right content.
Yeah, I think that qualification point is a great one because I do think there are situations where you might be creating content that doesn't get a ton of use, but it's there for a purpose. I can think of some good compliance reasons. I came from a financial services firm before this. You like having some of that content in there. However, and we're going to get a little bit later into the heavy costs of content maintenance and building. I would say that's where the working backward makes sense to me to really ask yourself, well, is it true? Did I spend the bulk of my time creating compliance content for a specific reason, but I knew it wouldn't be used? Or did I spend a lot of time creating piece of content I thought and hoped would be used and weren't? In which case, there is a bigger issue, right? And it's kind of like, hey, either I'm wrong in my assumption of what we need or what marketing built, right? Or I'm not getting it to the reps the right way, and they're using that local document from 9 months ago when I want them to use the new one. So as a highline statistic, I think a good learning here is go one level deeper, start to ask those questions, but remain really aware. If 40% of your content that you built for external purposes never gets shared, I'd say you need to refine what's being built or understand why people can't find it. Right?
100%.
Part of one of the underlying issues we did get to in the data as well is, well, some of that content's out of date, right? So if you look at the middle bulk here with the pink box around it, what we'd asked was, what percentage of your content would you say needs a refresh, right? And looking at that, I think you see almost 46% or so say over 40% of their content needs refreshing, right? So upwards on the right-hand side, you've got 8% of people who say almost 100% of their content needs refreshing. So, certainly an outlier there. I think this middle of the curve is really interesting, though, where you have, 22% of people are saying 20 to 40% of content needs refreshing. 30% of people are saying 40 to 60% of their content needs refreshing. At that point, you're getting into a majority of your content needs to be refreshed. And certainly, I think we see the impact then in content that gets used or shared.
Yeah,
absolutely. And it only really takes one or two of those outdated uses for the team to start to drop usage of content. They went to look for something, they found a product sheet from 2 years ago, and they're kind of like, I'm not going to check anymore, right? I'll just use my own thing, or I'll build my own thing. Like this enablement platform doesn't have the answers I need, and they start to give up, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think we see that here with the result, right? Just like low adoption itself. So what percentage of your enablement platform features, and we're going to get deeper into this in section 2, but do reps use regularly, right? And we see here the bulk again in the middle, 42% of respondents said, they use 40 to 60% of the features I have. And then on the left-hand side, you see people even using less. 12% or 13% of the respondents said they use 20% or less of the features that platform has. Now, some of those features are certainly admin-based, but a lot are meant for rep adoption. They're meant to drive usage. They're meant to help you control what they share. So I don't know, Luke, any thoughts on that? I certainly think seeing that left shift on the side of this page is a concerning one.
Yeah, it can be. It definitely can be. I think, look, this whole section is about losing faith in your tool, right? So you're totally right. But the low feature adoption, I don't think is a direct outcome of having outdated content or messy content. I think it may be.
Yeah.
But the more likely linkage is it's probably collateral damage from people having lost faith in the platform. Right. Yeah. So I think to the point where we were saying, fix the content problem first, do the measurement, understand what's there, understand what works, clean up the closet. And from there, then you've got a good baseline to start understanding, okay, now we have a reason for people to come and use the platform and to trust it. And then we can start drilling into, okay, what they're not using these features. Are they the right features for them? Like, what do they need?
Yeah.
Right? What do the sellers need to actually go and deliver this stuff? But again, I think it would be a miss to directly link it to the content. You can't fix your content and assume that the feature usage is going to go up. And feature usage may or may not be what they need anyway. So you got to anchor back with the field and what do they need? What's their day in the life? How does this work, both on the content and the tooling side?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's one of those underlying foundations. It's not the only one for the content. And there's dependencies here. I do think that faith point is an important one, and maybe one that if I were to take an audit away as any follower here and as the leader at Spekit, I would, which is within Spekit ourselves, within our own enablement platform. We drink our own champagne here, I will tell you. So Spekit is widely used across the organization. If I look at the content freshness, what are the other reasons I can see a specific rep isn't using it? And part of that, I think, does get down to really empowering the level of directors and managers of sales or CS to look at that usage for their own team as well and ask the question, why do I have one rep using and one rep not? Right? What are the differences? Is it their maturity? Is it their tenure? Is it how they were onboarded? Is it the sales cycle they have? Do I have more content in there relating to SMB than enterprise? And so I see a split there on who's using it. Like you can start to unpack it. There's that high level story and then going a level deeper. That is where we like empowering, again, here I'd say the manager level to look at analytics relating to that usage so that they're able to really draw that out. If I went in as COO and attempted to do that for the entirety of our organization, I'm not going to know the nuances versus like asking my sales manager, hey, you've got a team of 4. Why is one rep using it more than other? Like that's a great point for you to dig in with them and see if you can improve.
Yeah, agreed.
But that leads us to some takeaways here. So this is section 1. Again, it's easy to lose faith. We've talked a bit about how you can get proactive, but I'm interested in some of the takeaways you'd have and the stories you'd share here, Luke. We've given some high level takeaways on the left-hand side. Good content matters, right? We've talked a bit about that here, about having fresh, good content. How you design the program is critical and just in time. But curious your overall take on some of those, the actionable items of, okay, if you're looking at this data, here are the ways you'd approach some of these challenges.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's parse this a little bit, right? Your first point about content. There's good content. You're mentioning fresh or current content, and easy to find. Those are 3 different problems to solve. So you should unpack all of that because this is huge. I had an employee spend a whole year fixing a content management system one time because it got to be such a mess. So like it's a big problem, but it's really important. So let's parse this out so we can approach it, right? Good content. We just talked about that. Make sure you have the right stuff, right? Go talk to your sellers. What are they doing? What are they using? Go to the field and work backwards from there because that gives you your design spec. Now, don't assume, like take that with a grain of salt because they don't know what they don't know, but you have to understand what they're doing day to day to understand if you're building the right things. So absolutely have that voice of the field piece. The current content, that's what we were just talking about with, if it's outdated, Seth, you were saying, right? It just takes 1 or 2 pieces to have somebody lose. I mean, it's gotten so bad one time. I actually went into the UI and I took out the create date from what the users could see.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Just to triage the problem. Like content lifecycle management is a must. You got to do it. Usually what I do is I'll take a look at age and I'll combine that with usage and I'll lay those on top of each other, right? You're going to see a pretty steep cliff at some point. I would start there. What I would do then is I like to go back to my content creators. Again, usually it's product marketing that I start with. And I try to meet with them quarterly. And the point you just made, Seth, about like having your managers go look at the data and then go from there. Product marketing needs to have the data too, right? So if you own the tool, it's incumbent on you. You're the one with the numbers. So nothing's going to change unless you go and inform your stakeholders and your partners with what you're seeing and you guys work on a solution together. So I have my teams meet quarterly with the the content owners, and we come in and say, cool, here's the usage data, here's the age, and what should we keep? What should we update? What should we get rid of? But if you do it quarterly, it's more manageable.
Yeah.
You can look at like, oh, it's long tail, we'll refresh it next quarter, whatever it is. But it's more manageable if you can do it that way. Easy to find is really important. Easy to find. So if you're doing that, cool, you have good stuff. Great. We've cleared out. We have a process to make sure that we're getting rid of outdated stuff wherever we can. I say wherever you can, because you got to make sure you can't just like, I've gone and just swept the decks before and start hacking away. This is old, 1,000 items gone, 13 gigs gone. I've done both of those things. In some cases, you run into a problem where you've got a supply and demand problem. And if you just whack the stuff just blindly because it's old and there's nothing to backfill it with, either for staff reasons or the company's changing or there's a rebrand, you're gonna really impair the field. And so it's important that you can't. There's a chicken and the egg there, but you have to be holistic in your perspective there. Easy to find. To your point about that, I've got a test I run. It's a time to find test. Okay. How hard is it to find what you're looking for? And we get a cross section of the user base. We find 10 random pieces of content. We come up with directional clues that are like real world, and we get them. We pull them into a Zoom. We have them share their screen, and we feed them these prompts one at a time in the Zoom chat. And they're like, "All right, you're going into a mid-market opportunity. Go find a way to, how do we differentiate from the competitor? Go find an asset that's going to solve this problem." And we watch how they do it, right? Do they search? Do they browse? What terms do they put in? We record the whole thing. They should be able to find it in 30 seconds or less.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
If they can't, they're going to go somewhere else. And there's your point. You're going to lose faith. So you do that, and then you get your benchmark, and then you go and do the work, right? You clean up the metadata, you do the curation, and then go run it again. And then you have a data-driven way to figure out how messy is your closet, right?
Yeah.
So that's
love that analogy. Love that analogy. I think Rachel looks like loved it too. And I love that test, because I do think that test, we'll get into some of the how many sources it takes or how many locations it takes to find content in a little bit in the research. But I would love, even if people drop in the chat, I'm curious, how many of you think your team could find a piece of content in 30 seconds or less? Like, curious to hear responses from people on how confident you'd be in running that test today. I would have loved to have a poll set up on that, but like, drop some comments in if you feel strongly. But I do really like that idea. I love the quarterly meetings with product marketing, especially Luke. And it sounds like you've been able to build a strong relationship. I know, listen, we're all human. There can be political sensitivities sometimes. Different teams own stuff. I really think approaching with the data and having a conversation there where you're like, look, I know that they can find it. I did the 30-second test, so I know it's available. I know it's generally new. I know we've refreshed it. It's not being used. Let's talk about that. Feels different than like tossing it over, the wall without any context. So like, no one's using the data. You need to build better stuff. So coming armed with the things you do, I think really probably helps that to be a good conversation that feels less of an attack on another team and more of a partnership.
It does. It does. And you can't export your urgency to someone else. You're going to lose. Yeah. So having the data to have them come to that decision together, it's definitely a better way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Some great takeaways from this section. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, Luke.
No, not at all. There's a point about just in time on there, and I know you guys respect it, right? And so like that's, we should. Hey, I'll throw this out there too. If you can get there, it is awesome. It is awesome, but it's hard. You can't just bolt it on. It's, again, we're talking about people losing faith. I've done it both ways. I've done it with the answers on demand with the Gen AI stuff. I've done it with Spekit, in fact, and it worked really well. So where you're serving up the information just when you need. And it can be extremely powerful, but usually where the value comes in is when it's targeted and it's at just the right moment. So if you think about all the audiences you serve and all the moments and all of their different motions, there's a lot of them. And so to have relevant targeted content pop up at just the right time, A, there's a technical piece, but also B, there's a babysitting piece. Like that's a lot of content. And we're just talking about how hard it is to keep your static content clean.
Yeah.
If you've got situational time bound content that's going to pop up at this moment, and it can be great. I use Spekit and we reclaimed like 8 figures of pipeline. No lie. Like that's a legit figure by doing change management and next best action coaching in Salesforce when we changed the motion on the sales, like wildly powerful. Yeah. But I'm looking at my teams right now and I'm thinking, I wonder if I just need somebody on that full time. You should start into it, right? But like it's powerful, but don't think about it before you get into it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I love that story. I mean, yes, we love that we were able to partner with you guys when you were at ZoomInfo and deliver that. I think it's a good point out the bolt on, because we do see a lot of AI tools now that are like, throw this on top of that, right? Yeah. And so in terms of just in time, though, I do think, and this is our philosophy again, and this isn't a product pitch, I'm happy to walk anyone through this at a later date, but I do think it has to be embedded within the platform because it has to be personalized, right? Just in time doesn't mean this is here when you're using it. This is contextual. This is what you're working on. This is the right answer, and it's being delivered just in time. And bolting on pieces can fail to meet that consistent criteria, right? You miss pieces of that. And so what you end up in is like, that was a fast answer, but it was the wrong one, right? Which is also not great. Or, hey, this was a heavily personalized answer and right for the context, but I had to go find it. I had to enter a lot of context. I had to add a lot of information. And what you really want to get to is the middle of that. So I think that's a great point, and it's a reason not to bolt on and to be careful in how you build that stack, as steward of the stack, as you've said. So with that as part one, okay, so the things we can do to help build faith or get proactive, build trust in some of those ways we talked about. I think Luke shared some great ideas for that test and that quarterly meeting with PMMs. If we're looking at part two now, well, a lot of features lack adoption and usage. And so let's pull that apart. I mean, obviously, vendors like us are always selling you features. We're telling you, got to do this thing. It's the new, it's the best thing, the next like, but how true are those? So this is a mirror of the slide we just left off on, just for continuity. So again, low feature adoption is a challenge. And it's a pretty consistent challenge, I think, from every enablement professional I've talked to, whether in this study or outside of it. We're always fighting a battle with reps. I think a deeper question is asking, well, why is that? And so I've juxtaposed two of the questions here. It's a little complicated, so we'll spend some time in this slide. But if we look at the left-hand side, that question was asking, what are the features that reps don't use today? And the right-hand side was a question asking, what are the features that we as buyers and champions and administrators get excited about? And there is unfortunately some overlap between those two. Now, we're not going to jump to conclusions, as Luke cautioned us last time. There's a deeper level we can go here. I think the good news is that the top two features reps don't use are not ones we're excited about anymore, right? If you look at those check marks, so live presentations, presentation building, we have learned as owners not to be too excited about those. So those on the right-hand side are reflected. But the next three is where it gets a bit more tense, right? So the features reps are not currently using, there might be a slew of reasons for that, but digital sale rooms, a lot of respondents there, which is interesting because we see so much conversation around that, I'd say, in the community. Two is sharing content to buyers. So kind of similar deal rooms, but tracking usage, finding some way to tie that to ROI, and then CRM integrations. But then if we flip to the other side about the top three things we're excited about, what you see is sharing content to buyers and tracking usage, CRM integration, and digital sale rooms. So again, we have some more context here, and I don't want to jump too fast in there, but I do want to pause for a minute, Luke, because it is, it's an interesting visual juxtaposition, even if there is reasons behind that.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's really interesting. What are they excited about? What do they actually use? You got to build on purpose, right? And I was saying earlier with the content, go talk to your users and find out what they need. When I buy software, I start with the pain and I work that back into a spec of what I need to solve for. And I do all my value modeling. And then from there, then I go and build that. And when you do that, then you know what you're building because this is what you bought for, right? And it can do more. Maybe it can do more than that, but like all that homework on the front end should really inform the scope that you go and build. And then hopefully you're not surprised when you find out what they're using, what they're not. It's not going to solve everything, but if you do that, you're starting from a much better place. The DSRs is an interesting example. I've tried. Part of this is just breaking through, right? Like people don't know what they don't know. Part of it is breaking habits. I did a DSR training where I pulled in a sales director from the vendor and I pulled him on a call with all of my sales teams and they're like, tell us how this works. And he legit went through, I use this in this moment in my day-to-day in this tool. And so you talk about the relevance. Here's a peer, here's success stories. Here's, I'm showing you, not just telling you all the things that in enablement, we try to get all those things into a training. We did a cash-based contest after that to promote adoption. We had 4% of the population use the thing, 4%, right? Yeah. So all of that. And what happened was I came back around later, some forward-thinking, sales manager says, hey, I want to use these things. This was like almost a year later, right? And even when they were using them, there was this overhead. It was the habits. And as I started working with them, we started getting into expectation management and holding their hand. DSRs are for the long game. It's for a longer sales cycle, right? You don't see the difference between that and a share link. It's still a link for a user. So if I lose that link, like that doesn't make it any easier for me. But the value comes in and being able to share that context and have that be portable throughout the buying committee. But like that doesn't matter if you've got a short deal cycle or a small buying committee. And so having the tool for the job, and again, working back to what does the field need? Who's your target audience? What's their persona? How do they buy? Like if you know what you're solving for, you can go build on purpose. And then you can kind of put forward stuff that's more likely to be value added. But sometimes it just takes a few at bats to kind of, get into it.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I do think, there is always a tension there between pushing and pulling and, using those pilot or test cases to prove value. And then at some point there's an unlock and you start to see some adoption. But then other times you see features you're not ready to implement. So Spekit again has a lot of inbuilt AI capabilities, and we do have a number of enterprise clients who aren't quite ready there yet. But then we talk to the reps, and the reps are like, they don't make AI available. I turn to the side and do ChatGPT on my phone. And you're like, you tell that to an enablement person or a compliance person, and they freak out. They're like, I don't want you getting an answer from ChatGPT, but the organization hasn't quite caught up with it either. So there's always a tension between we're trying to launch things we know will help, and we're trying to do it in a way we think will be helpful. sometimes users are interested in different things, or they're pursuing their own, or they're not ready for it. So finding a path to kind of define those things is important. And the follow-up question we asked about kind of what some of the reasons are, again, I don't want to put it all on us. There are the user conditions we just talked about, but there were some findings here about just, well, what were features that were never properly implemented? And we see, again, one of our favorites, presentation building there up at the top hand side, where people just didn't feel it was built in the right way. I think there's some other interesting ones like digital sale rooms and CRM integration, again, rise towards the top, where people are like, well, it didn't feel like it was built in a way where it was easy or intuitive, or I find value in it, right? So the time to implement it properly really matters. And if we look at the right-hand side of the answering the question, like why weren't these implemented the right way? Time was a big one on there, right? Time, the difficulty to implement it itself, and then not working as expected were three big ones. But I think the time one jumps out at me just because a lot of what we talked about, everything we're talking about here today is great ideas, but you start to add those hours up and you're like, okay, well, I'm going and doing this training for a sales professional. Like I'm getting this team spun up on it. I'm convincing them to use it. I'm refreshing the content. And quickly you run out of time in the week. And so part of that, I think, gets to your point about being really clear on why you're implementing something. Because if you're going to spend the time to prioritize it, you should do it well, but that comes with a cost, right? That comes with a trade-off.
Totally agree.
I think it's unsurprising, given some of that when we ask then how easy it is to prove the impact of your enablement efforts, what we kind of see a bit of the impact of the dispersion of that effort. You're doing a lot of things. And so it can be hard sometimes. If we look at the slide, we see that the left-hand side is the difficulty slide. And so easily half of respondents are 3 and above. And so it's difficult to prove the impact of enablement of the platform you have. And I think some of the earlier slides just reflect that. If we're trying to do a lot of things, how are we able to really tie those things to impact? Can we draw a steel thread through what we did, why we did it, and the impact it has? So then we asked, well, okay, if you're thinking about, choosing a new enablement platform, given everything you just told us, what capabilities do matter the most to you? And there, I think it was interesting to see the number one thing that rose to the top was, again, about our end user, ease of content access by reps. Like I think as enablement professionals, we do put that end user experience to the front because we know that adoption is critical to any of that ROI we have. If no one's using it, it doesn't matter how good the implementation of the platform is, like we're getting no ROI out of it. But I think the next couple ones really speak to our own experience as the owners of the tool. So ease of reporting jumped up there. We've heard that one a lot lately of people just saying, hey, I really need an easy way to capture. Even those dashboards you talked about a little while ago, for example, we've pre-built this in our analytic dashboard. It shows you old content that's being used a lot. So content over a year old that is being heavily used right now, and content under 3 months old that's not being used, right? Trying to draw out some of this. How do we make this easy just to see where the hot spots to spend time are? Because I do think with the amount of content and the amount of juggling that teams are doing, like the harder analytics is to find, the harder it is for us to draw that ROI. But definitely an interesting slide here. There's a lot of places people are looking for easier, simpler interactions to drive value.
Yeah.
So again, coming maybe to some solutions and hearing a bit more from you here again, Luke. I mean, we tried to draw out, okay, if those are the challenges, what are some ways that we can address and manage them? And we saw a couple here about not eating with your eyes. So like we we're just talking about a little bit, carefully considering what you're actually going to implement and use. Like, hey, I'm about to buy a platform and I've got these 4 features spun up. Do I have a plan to implement those 4 this year? Can I clearly tie them to the right outcomes and initiatives? Doubling down on simplicity. So like, how do we make it simple and easy to do what we need to do and for reps to access information? The more steps it takes to do something, the less likely a rep is going to do it. And I say that as a person who used to be a sales rep. That just is the way it is. And then being able to prove ROI. So really asking yourself, how do I draw that steel thread between what I'm doing and the outcomes? But yeah, curious your thought as a person who's had to prove ROI a number of times when purchasing platforms or when making greater investments in an enablement team, what would you say in regards to features and how you've been most successful there?
Yeah, absolutely. We throw that word around. We throw that term around a lot. ROI, right? Yeah. It's not black and white. Like it can be subjective. In my experience, it's time, it's risk, it's money, it's confidence, right? So like the way that you measure really, You got to think about which tool and what your objective is and what your audience cares about. Who opened their wallet for this, right? Who's got skin in the game? And
Yeah.
then make sure you understand that you're speaking their language. So, okay, let's connect dots in this, right? So I think if we're talking about ROI on a platform, why did you buy the platform? And if you're not the one who bought it, then what's it supposed to do and what are you using it for? You have to have a very clear idea of what the objective is. So you can back your way into how do you measure this? And it's incumbent on you to be able to go and tell that story and manage expectations, right? Because if you don't, then you don't know what your goal is. And you might do all the homework to come and present a look at all the time we saved. Look at all the rep time that we saved. I've done that before and had my COO come back and be like, I don't care about time. I don't know that that's been used.
Right.
Right. And so like all of that effort just is gone. So it's important to understand your audience, right? Know your audience.
Yep.
Also, we talk about ROI of a platform and ROI of enablements, and those are not the same thing, but the tools are the hard metrics. And so it's really important to connect those. So, all right. So here's a few thoughts, right? So when I think about ROI for a tool, again, obviously know what you bought it for and what it's supposed to do, but sometimes you go get a tool just to make the pain go away, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you do it as an investment, and it can be both, but one's going to be priority. So here's a story. Last summer, we took the kids to Europe. First big trip, right? Super excited. We're talking a 13-hour plane flight to get over there, right? And I got a 6-year-old, and this is not going to go well. And so he had some old, those Kindle Fire tablets. They last for like a year and a half. Any parents out? Yeah. We had one of those. That thing was toast. Okay, I need to buy a stinking tablet so we can all survive this long flight. And so we're going out. We're going to buy a tablet. And my criteria for buying this thing was it's got to work well. It's got to be easy to use, and it's got to be under a palatable cost. Right. So these are not unit economics measures I was looking at. It needs to make the pain go away. I need to be able to try it. And at the end of the day, I don't care if it's $100 or $200. If it does the job and gets us through that, we're fine. Now, this applies in business too. When I was a CSM, I had a customer who had a 17-year-old intranet site that they were running all their go-to-market motions on. 17 years. So the pain was the thing wasn't mobile, the thing wasn't reliable, the uptime was bad, the user experience was terrible. And so they came to us and we had this mobile app that they loved. They were my customer for 5 years. Every stinking year, every time renewal came around, look at our new stuff. Look at all the features we've added. Look what you should be doing. And they would nod their heads and they wouldn't take the bait on any of it, but they continued to renew because what they bought solved their pain. It made the pain go away. And as long as it wasn't going to break the bank, no one was going to go and overturn the apple cart. Now, I mean, there's a thing there. So you got to know what you're buying. Like on the other end, if you're buying an investment, we bought automation software at one of the companies I was at. We had to understand what's the risk. We had a human plugging in all the things, scheduling new hires into all of these different sessions. There's 90 sessions every 2 weeks. What if the guy got sick? We got a 7-figure talent program running through, right? What if the guy got sick? And so nobody was thinking about this, but to the point to where we could say, okay, well, single point of failure, a lot of problem, a lot of investment at stake. Let's do the unit economics. Let's figure out how much are we paying this person? How many hours are they spending? What's the opportunity cost? And we can go and put a case together for an investment to where we did have to fight for budget for this because it wasn't a recognized pain. But when we shone a light on it and when we came with the data, again, we knew our audience, we knew what they cared about. We got blessing to go do that. And then we put it in and it was wildly successful. And so a lot of words here, but ROI is subjective. Know what your audience cares about. Know if it's an emotional or an investment purchase, and then build a story around, do the homework to do a story around it. But if you've got a tool, you're going to have the data and you're going to have the ability to go and use that in service of your story, but you got to manage expectations and go tell a good story.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I do think if I look at that, especially, I will say again, I'm the COO here. I own the budget decision on a lot of tools, right? Sure. So I get a lot of feedback on those and I challenge this. And I do think that steel thread of know the pain and being able to be really concise on why that pain matters, right? Because one of the challenges, a place I push my team, even for our own sales and partnership, when they come to us with tools and I say, hey, you're telling me about your pain, and I'm not trying to be a meanie here, but I'm like, tell me how that pain translates to me. Because I don't know if the pain you're talking about should be 40% of your job. Maybe it should. Maybe this is the job. And the job you're trying to solve with the tool, I'm like, I expect that to be in your role. Help me see why the pain of that time cost, that energy cost can roll up to me. So if you're spending 30% less of your time doing X, then you can roll it into Y and Seth that impacts our company objectives like this. I think that translation really helps. I think a lot of times we get caught in the like, hey, this would make my life and my job more efficient, which we know inherently has benefit for the company. But whatever number of layers we have to go through to get approval on that, mean we have to make that a really clear translation then. And this is why it matters to the company as a whole. Like this is what happens with this. So I think it's just a place I would say we can all do a lot more work to connect those dots and really help tell that story.
Great.
All right, we're on to the last session. For those who are still hanging with us, would love to see any comments on people who have found interesting ways to prove ROI, or if you have a great template, or even just a great process or approach. Like, would love to hear that. I think again, it's a thing we all continually have to do every year, especially in this environment. All of our budgets are going to be up for challenge. We're going to have to prove why the headcount, the tools, like the investments we make are returning an impact to the company. So hearing from people, if you want to drop anything in the chats, that's great. But moving on to part 3, because we got about 15 minutes left here. This is where we really dove into a couple of the different processes within our platform that were hindering some of that ROI and adoption. And so there's 4 of these we're going to quickly cover. The first one was again about content creation. And we referenced this earlier. The challenge of content being used, because to Luke's point, it could have value even if it's not often used, is the amount of time we spend on it. So over half the respondents are spending more than 5 hours a week creating content. And a large portion that you could see are spending double that. We got 10% of people spending more than 12 hours a week creating content. Like that's incredibly costly behavior, right? Like just the amount of time spent managing, nurturing, doing that. And so that is one thing to note about the impact of content not being used is we spent all this time ahead building it. That time potentially could have been spent in some places like rollout. And I know, Luke, here's where a lot of you, what you're talking about is like, well, it depends on the goal of that content. Is it training content meant for the future? Is it et cetera? But if we're looking at just the statistics and saying, well, 80% are seeing, less than 60% adoption in the first month of that content. So is that intended? And there's maybe the second order of question we'd ask, like, is that okay? This is training content for a SKO in 3 months. And so I'm just getting it done now. Great, no problem. Or was this content that I really thought was going to be adopted? Did I partner with PMM on it? Did I ask them to build this? And are now we seeing some of the challenges of it? Because that's where it really gets more costly is I thought this was going to help our sales cycles. And now I got less than 40% adoption on it, which means I'm not having the impact I thought I would.
Yeah. When you've got urgent content, I think that's really an opportunity for you to show up and to put a shot in the arm for the trust in the platform and also for your ROI, right? If you've got a huge product launch coming, everyone's looking to you at enablement, right? And if you're going to drive everyone through your tool, and if you can give them the right stuff and the right time and measure it and make sure it works, obviously they're going to care more about that.
Yeah.
And then you've got, then you have some more grace for them to come back to the platform because, hey, you did a good job for me. You gave me what I needed here. So, I don't know if the first month thing, I would slice and dice that. Yeah. It isn't, right? It is important, but I think to the degree that you can identify the content related to the campaign that is time bound, look at that in isolation and use that as one measure of your success, right? Yeah. And I would pull that out as opposed to just looking across everything, and that'll give you a great insight.
Yeah. Now, this next slide, I think, is one that we all are going to agree on. And I would actually love to see if anyone wants to throw an emoji in the chat about how this one's making them feel free to, because this is really the foundation of why Spekit was founded. And it is the pain point we hear so much. But it was asking the question, where do your reps go for content? And I think the challenge we saw here is that most reps have to search in at least 3 places for enablement content. And what we didn't ask here, but I think is probably the follow-up question is, and then after that, did you just go ask your enablement person for it? Which I think is really the cap on that. But we see like an average of 3 places for it. And that's they're going to their messaging app, right? Like whether it's Teams or Slack, and they're checking there, they're asking someone or they're searching. Then they're checking like Google Drive or SharePoint or Confluence. They want to go check their repository. And then they're going to their enablement platform if the company has one, or maybe an LMS. So you see this wide variety of places they're going, but it's really like so many constant checkpoints that like the switching costs on them is huge. But then again, I think we also see the admin costs of us being like, I just taught you that 2 weeks ago. Why are you asking this question? Like it's over here. You should be using it. So I think this one definitely struck a chord with both, as we were talking about it with the SEC, the Sales Enablement Collective. They're kind of like, this feels like a big one, but I think also just us as it's like the problem we're most focused on. But I don't know if you have any thoughts there. Luke, I know we've talked about this one ad nauseum in some of the work we've done with the client, but I know this is a big one.
Yeah, it is. It's huge. It's huge. Gartner's got research about the seller drag, right? All of the overhead. And we've all heard those stats. Sellers using 60, 70% of their time doing stuff that's not selling. It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
I've tried to be intentional about, hey, use this platform, go here for this stuff, go here for this stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a half step better than, at least you're giving them clarity. And if you have an intentionality in your deployment plan, and if you're understanding what content you have, then like I've tried that, and I think that gets you further along, but it probably still sticks with a user, right?
Yep.
So
Yeah. No, it's not easy. And again, I mean, it's one of those places where I think our personal consumer experiences start to inform it, where we ask, well, I know in my own life, I go X to find a place and I can find it. Why can't that be simple here? And that's where my worry as a COO is always, hey, I don't want my team going outside of my resources to find answers, because that is where you end up with the wrong answers or poor answers and like, or sending the wrong materials. And that's what I really don't want. So the simpler you can make this and keep attention, I think the better. The next process challenge was an interesting one. And it had to, it's in that content space, but it's the question, how easy does it make it to identify existing content gaps, right? So not necessarily like this content is old or this needs refreshing, but like, oh, we don't have content around X. And a lot of times I think this feedback cycle comes in a conversation with the sales team where, listen, with our own analytics, we do love to call BS on the sales team. So I'm like, you asked for that thing. I'm looking at the analytics. I'm like, you didn't use that thing I built you. So don't ask me for anything else until you're using that thing. But identifying the gaps without that conversation can be hard. And the more data we have in the surround area of content like it can help us drive that. But it's difficult today for people to identify that, right? It really is to say, oh, this is how I know I have gaps in this space.
Mm-hmm. It's true. One thing that's helped me, and I know you guys just rolled out a feature, I think, with generative AI. You can ask questions and any sort of on-demand questions. If you have access to what those questions are, you can use that as a leading indicator as far as where are the knowledge gaps in the field. And so if you have access to data, that's helpful to think of it in that way. Yeah,
for sure. All right, and then our last data slide, and then we'll have kind of a summary slide of this section. But thanks to all for sticking through us. I know it's been a lot of graphs and content. But one, how many hours per week? And this, again, I think people will feel this one in their hearts. How many hours per week do you currently spend on administrative tasks in your enablement platform? And again, the center square here, 42% of people are spending at least 2 to 4 hours. Then we see a tilt of another, 20+% spending over that, spending 5 to 8, or even, again, I feel like I'm picturing in my head one poor schmuck who's spending 12 hours on content and 12 hours on administrative tasks on this far right side and just, not getting time for anything else. But there's a fair amount of time being spent on administrative tasks here. I would say, anything in that 2+ hour range feels pretty costly. You're not going to get away from administrative tasks, but the more time you spend there, the less time you have for other stuff. So that is a tough one. So takeaways from this, I'm going to, again, turn it over to Luke here for some of his experience, but with inefficient processes and poor UX, how do you figure out where time is being wasted, and how just do you build the right process so that you can get the ROI you need?
Yeah. I think you touched on a lot of it. I think honestly, like being able to identify the gaps, being sensitive to the rep experience and that seller burden, to the degree that you can be aware of that stuff, then then you know what you can build against, right? We already talked about some of the tips and tricks to find out if the tools are working and how you want to quantify things and building on purpose. I think, yeah, I would just say pay attention to this. Pay attention to the time, because that becomes one of the things you measure from your ROI. And it also, I had a request, hey, let's go translate all of this stuff into Japanese. Great. We have a contingent in Japan. That's great. But like, it's new hire content and our hiring forecast doesn't call for any hires there. So I could go commit, a week and a half of my team's time to do all of this, or I can wait and level check and say, well, we've got a big SCO coming up. Maybe that's more urgent, right? So try to have a holistic perspective of what's going on. And if you know what the lift is to go and create certain types of content or certain campaigns, you can make more informed decisions.
Yeah, it's great. And I think that gets to a point you raised earlier in a different vein about being able to tie what you're doing to the organization's initiatives. Like the more enmeshed you are in the company's goals and targets, and the more you're able to get that seat at the table, which I know can be hard sometimes, but you knew that the company wasn't hiring anyone in Japan. That allowed you to have that conversation versus if you didn't know that, you might go off and do that work being like, great, I guess we're hiring in Japan. I got to go build all this documentation. And then you don't see any uptick from it. So really, again, the more we can tie ourselves and understand those company goals and be a strategic thought partner there, which can be tough, right? And I don't know if you have any advice for the people on that, or if we want to end on another note, but I would love any of your thoughts on even that point, or how we can think about building those frameworks for ROI to help drive answers forward in an organization.
Don't sell yourself short. I think a lot of times you've got the data. People are coming to enablement. Salesforce's State of the Sales that they just put out, one of the major themes is that sales teams en masse are turning to enablement right now as their preferred growth lever, right? And so we have an opportunity. We should take advantage of that. All of that to say, like, if there's an opportunity here for us, to your point, Seth, like we may not be intimately ingrained in all the different parts of the organization. We can go out and source that stuff. Show up. You've got data. We play a really important role in this whole thing. But if you sit back and wait, and you don't go reach out and actively look for that acumen or the connection points, you're limiting your opportunity for impact. But if you can't connect the dots, just talk to people. What are you working on? Really, that's happening? Oh, interesting. Oh, what do we do over here? Even as organic as that, it allows you to have that wider context and allows you to show up and add more value. And then understand that what we deliver does have value. And if we come with that posture, I think we get a lot more opportunity to speak and to make an impact.
Yeah, it's great. Well, thank you, Luke. I always enjoy our conversations. I always learn so much from you. So thank you for being willing to take this time and spend it with us. I think, we're happy to make this the actual report. I mean, we'll make the presentation too, but there is a wider report that includes commentary from Luke, from some of the other expert commenters, along with a few other, we covered most of the graphs, there's a few other ones in there, but you can also dive into some of the back-end analysis on it too. So, reach out to us. We're happy to make that available. And then certainly if you have any other questions, I think both Luke and I are pretty active on LinkedIn. Don't be a stranger. Please reach out if there's other stuff we can answer for you. As I will say, I think we all enjoy talking about this stuff and meeting others in the community. So thank you for spending the time with us today. And Luke, I don't know, any final thoughts, words of wisdom, closing, pithy, one sentence?
I'm not that smart. Just thank you for the time and best of luck. This is great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great end of the week.
Thank you.